Duke's voice cut through the stunned silence of the grand ballroom. "You are mistaken, my lady," he said, his gaze as cold as ice as it fell upon the triumphant Lady Beatrice Crawford. But his eyes were not for her. They were fixed on the woman she had just exposed, the simple tutor, Emily Vance. Emily stood frozen, her secret identity shattered, her worst fears made manifest before the cream of London society. A cruel baron from her past was here to claim her, and her rival was smirking, assured of her victory. But the Duke of Blackwood wasn't looking at Emily with disdain or disappointment. He was looking at her with a fire she'd never seen before, and what he said next would not only save her, but would also shatter a century of aristocratic tradition. The carriage wheels crunched over the gravel, each rotation a mournful sound that seemed to echo the trepidation in Emily Vance's heart. Before her loomed Blackwood Manor, a Gothic masterpiece of stone and slate that clawed at the perpetually grey English sky. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement of power, of lineage, of a world so far removed from her own that she felt like a ghost before she had even stepped across its threshold. Her father, a respected merchant before a disastrous shipping venture had claimed their fortune and then his life, had always told her she had the bearing of a lady. But as she clutched her single worn valise, Emily felt anything but. She was a tutor, a paid companion, a servant in all but name, arriving to tame the supposedly untamable daughter of a duke. The great oak doors swung open as if by an unseen hand, revealing a cavernous entrance hall. The air inside was cool and smelled of beeswax and old paper. A woman with a spine as straight as a ship's mast and hair, the colour of spun silver, stood waiting. Her black dress was immaculate, her expression severe. "Miss Vance, I presume?" "I am Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper," she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "His Grace is not available to receive you. He is occupied. I will show you to your quarters. You will meet your charge, Lady Isabella, in the morning." Emily murmured a polite thank you, her voice sounding small in the vast space. Mrs. Gable led her up a grand staircase, its banister polished to a dark gleam. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors followed their ascent, their painted eyes seeming to judge her presence. They passed through opulent corridors lined with tapestries and fine furniture shrouded in dust covers, a clear sign that the heart of the manor was seldom used. Finally, they reached a modest wing of the house. "This will be your room," Mrs. Gable said, opening a door. "The nursery and schoolroom are at the end of this hall. Lady Isabella takes her meals there. You will take yours with me and the senior staff. Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." She gave Emily a final, appraising look before turning and disappearing down the corridor, her footsteps unnervingly silent. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a small writing desk, and a single window overlooking a vast, untamed garden. It was a world away from the gilded cage her parents had once envisioned for her, married off to some portly lord. A bitter smile touched Emily's lips. She had escaped that fate, at least. Her family had intended for her to marry Baron Montgomery, a man twice her age with a cruel reputation and grasping hands. His pursuit had only become more relentless after her father's death, convinced he could buy her compliance. Fleeing London under the guise of taking a position in the country had been an act of desperation. No one here knew her as the daughter of the disgraced Thomas Vance. Here she was just Miss Vance, the tutor. And that anonymity was her shield. The next morning, Emily entered the schoolroom with a carefully prepared smile. The room was large, with tall windows that should have filled it with light, but heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight. A small girl with a cascade of dark, tangled hair sat hunched over a book, though she didn't appear to be reading. This was Lady Isabella Beaumont, aged 9. "Good morning, Lady Isabella," Emily said, her voice gentle. "I am Miss Vance, your new tutor." The girl didn't look up. "The last one left after a week. She said I was a demon child." Her voice was a low, sullen mumble. "Well," Emily replied, undeterred, as she moved to pull back the heavy curtains. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "I don't believe in demons, and I plan on staying for much longer than a week." Isabella finally looked up, squinting in the sudden brightness. Her eyes were a startlingly deep blue, just like the eyes in the imposing portrait of the Duke in the main hall. But they were clouded with a deep, impenetrable sadness. Emily's heart went out to the lonely child. She knew what it felt like to have your world collapse around you. Their first lesson was a disaster. Isabella refused to read, threw a book when asked to do arithmetic, and answered every question with a defiant glare. Yet, Emily remained patient. She didn't raise her voice or threaten punishment. Instead, when Isabella knocked over an ink pot, staining the priceless Persian rug, Emily simply knelt, blotted the stain, and said, "Well, that's a shame. It looks a bit like a dragon, don't you think, if you squint?" For the first time, a flicker of something other than anger crossed the child's face. Curiosity. It was during this quiet, tense moment that the door opened. Emily looked up from the floor, her hands stained with ink, to see a man standing in the doorway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in impeccable riding clothes. His dark hair was slightly wind-swept, and his jaw was set in a severe line. It was him, Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood. His piercing blue eyes, the same shade as his daughter's, swept the room, taking in the defiant child, the overturned inkpot, and the ink-stained woman on his floor. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It was not a question, it was an accusation. Emily slowly rose to her feet, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Your Grace, my apologies. We had a small accident." The Duke's gaze shifted to his daughter, who shrank back in her chair. "Isabella, have you been tormenting your new tutor already?" Before Isabella could answer, Emily stepped forward slightly. "Not at all, Your Grace. We were merely having a vigorous discussion about mythology. The inkpot was an unfortunate casualty of our enthusiasm." Alistair looked from Emily's calm face to the book on the floor, a dry text on Roman history. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. He had expected to find this new tutor either in tears or in a rage. He had certainly not expected to find her calmly defending his notoriously difficult daughter while covered in ink. He had hired her based on a sterling recommendation from a distant acquaintance, never having met her. She was not what he'd expected. She was younger, and there was a quiet resilience in her posture that intrigued him. "See that it does not happen again, Miss Vance," he said, his tone clipped and dismissive. He gave his daughter one last, unreadable look before turning on his heel and leaving as abruptly as he had arrived. The door clicked shut, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her first encounter with the formidable Duke was over. He was as cold and imposing as his manner, a man clearly burdened by more than just a disobedient child. As she turned back to Isabella, she saw the girl watching her, that flicker of curiosity in her eyes, now a steady, questioning gaze. Perhaps, Emily thought, just perhaps, She had found an ally in the most unlikely of places. The days that followed settled into a fragile routine. Emily discovered that conventional lessons were a battlefield she could not win with Isabella. The girl resisted textbooks and recitations with a ferocity that was both exhausting and, in a strange way, admirable. So Emily changed her tactics. She abandoned the stuffy schoolroom. One morning, instead of opening a geography book, she took Isabella by the hand. "Today's lesson is about cartography," she announced. "We are going to map the gardens." Isabella, expecting another fight, was momentarily stunned into silence. Her resistance crumbled in the face of this novel idea. They spent the entire day outdoors, walking the overgrown paths of Blackwood's neglected gardens. Emily taught Isabella how to identify different flowers and trees, weaving in lessons about their Latin names and their origins. She showed her how to use the sun to find her direction and how to pace out distances to sketch a rudimentary map on a large sheet of parchment. For the first time, Isabella was not just compliant, she was engaged. She asked questions, her small face alight with genuine interest as she learned the names of the wild roses that choked the stone walls. From his study, which overlooked that very section of the garden, Duke Alistair Beaumont watched them. He had intended to work on estate papers, a task he loathed, but found himself captivated by the scene below. He saw his daughter, who had barely spoken a civil word to anyone since her mother's death 2 years prior, smiling. He saw her point excitedly at something, while her tutor knelt beside her, her bonnet having fallen back to reveal auburn hair that caught the sun like threads of fire. He saw a connection, a warmth that had been absent from this house for far too long. His first wife, Lady Charlotte, had despised the country and had even less patience for her own child. She had seen Isabella as a mere dynastic necessity, an inconvenient product of a loveless, arranged marriage. Charlotte's world was one of London balls and glittering jewels, and she had treated Isabella with an icy indifference that had wounded the child far more than any harsh word could. After Charlotte's death from a swift and sudden fever, Alistair had watched his daughter retreat into a shell of anger and silence that no one, not governess after governess, could penetrate. Until now. He began to seek out Emily's company, under the guise of discussing his daughter's progress. He would find her in the library in the evenings, after Isabella was in bed. He'd intended the conversations to be brief formalities, but they quickly evolved. "Isabella seems improved," he said one evening, standing stiffly by the fireplace as Emily looked up from a book she was mending. "She is remarkably intelligent, Your Grace," Emily replied, her fingers deftly stitching the spine. "She simply requires a different key to unlock her potential. She learns better by seeing and doing than by rote memorization." The last tutor insisted on 4 hours of recitation a day. It ended with Isabella locking herself in her room and refusing to come out. A rare, wry smile touched his lips. I confess, I was tempted to join her. Emily laughed, a soft, musical sound that seemed to startle them both. "I can't say I blame you, Your Grace. I believe a mind, like a garden, thrives with a little fresh air and sunshine." Their conversations deepened. He discovered her knowledge was not limited to the typical subjects for a governess. She could speak fluently about political philosophy, debate the merits of agricultural reforms he was considering for the estate, and discuss classical poetry with a passion that matched his own. He found himself lingering in the library long after he should have retired, drawn to the quiet intelligence in her hazel eyes and the thoughtful way she considered her words before she spoke. He was a man starved for a connection of the mind, and he was finding it in the most unexpected of places. He was beginning to see past the simple brown dress of the tutor and was seeing the woman, Emily Vance. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon. Alistair found Emily and Isabella not in the schoolroom, but in the Manor's dusty, forgotten ballroom. Dust covers lay crumpled on the floor, and Emily was teaching Isabella the basic steps of a waltz, humming a tune as they spun awkwardly. "The first dance at any ball is always the most terrifying," Emily was saying, her voice light. "But if you know the steps, you have nothing to fear. It's just walking. But to music." Alistair leaned against the doorframe, watching them. He saw the genuine affection in Emily's smile and the hesitant trust in his daughter's eyes. He remembered the last time there had been music in this room. It had been a stiflingly formal affair, hosted by his late wife, an event she had orchestrated to show off her wealth and status. There had been no joy in it, only calculation. He stepped into the room. "May I cut in?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Isabella froze, her previous ease vanishing as she looked at her formidable father. But Emily simply smiled and curtsied. "Of course, Your Grace. Her ladyship is a quick study." Alistair took his daughter's small hand. "Miss Vance has been humming off the tune," he said gently. "But a waltz is always better with the proper music." He walked over to the grand piano that had sat silent for years, lifted the cover, and after a moment's hesitation, began to play. A beautiful, melancholic waltz filled the vast, empty room. The melody was complex, filled with a longing that spoke of his own loneliness. He wasn't a master pianist, but he played with a surprising depth of emotion. Emily watched, her heart aching with a strange, unfamiliar pang. In that moment, he was not the cold, intimidating Duke of Blackwood. He was a father trying to connect with his child, a lonely man expressing his sorrow through music. She took Isabella's other hand and guided her, helping her follow her father's lead as he played. The three of them, the broken Duke, the silent child, and the penniless tutor, moved together in the dusty ballroom, a fragile, unspoken understanding forming between them. For the first time since her arrival, Blackwood Manor felt less like a place of employment, and more like a place where hope, however faint, might just be possible. The fragile peace of Blackwood Manor was shattered by the arrival of a gilded carriage and a flurry of correspondence. Lady Beatrice Crawford had descended upon them. The daughter of the influential Earl of Ashworth, Beatrice was everything society expected in a future duchess, exquisitely beautiful, impeccably dressed, and armed with a pedigree that stretched back to the Norman conquest. She was also, as Emily quickly discovered, possessed of a will of iron and a tongue as sharp as a dueling pistol. Beatrice made no secret of her intentions. The Duke of Blackwood was the most eligible widower in England, and she was determined to be his new duchess. She arrived for what was meant to be a weekend visit, but showed every sign of settling in for a protracted siege. Her first encounter with Emily was in the morning room. Emily was arranging flowers she and Isabella had picked, a simple pleasure that had become a daily ritual. Beatrice swept in, dressed in a morning gown of French silk that likely cost more than Emily's entire yearly salary. "You must be the governess," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with condescension. She didn't wait for a reply. "Do be a dear and have one of the maids fetch me some tea, and tell cook I prefer my scones with Cornish cream, not that dreadful Devonshire sort." She dismissed Emily with a flick of her wrist, already turning to admire her own reflection in a gilt mirror. Emily felt a hot flush of anger, but held her tongue. She was an employee. This was her place. She simply inclined her head and said, "As you wish, my lady," before leaving to find a footman. The distinction was important. She would not be treated as a personal maid. Beatrice's presence changed the atmosphere of the manor entirely. The quiet, comfortable routine Emily had established was constantly interrupted. Beatrice insisted on formal dinners every night, filling the silent dining hall with her incessant chatter about London gossip, court intrigues, and the failings of her friends. She treated Isabella as a nuisance, an obstacle to be bypassed in her pursuit of the Duke. "Good heavens, Alistair," she'd said one evening, wrinkling her perfect nose as Isabella struggled to cut her meat. "The child has the table manners of a stable hand. My dear, a lady does not hold her fork like a dagger." Isabella flushed with shame and dropped her fork with a clatter, lapsing back into her sullen silence. Alistair's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his public manners too ingrained to rebuke a guest at his own table. Emily, seated at the far end of the table, as was her station, felt a surge of protectiveness. "Lady Isabella has been making excellent progress in her studies of both etiquette and the classics, my lady," she interjected coolly. "Her grasp of Latin syntax is quite remarkable for her age." Beatrice turned her cold eyes on Emily, a slow, malicious smile spreading across her face. "How very educational. But society, Miss Vance, cares far more for a young lady's deportment than her ability to conjugate verbs. A lesson you would do well to remember." The barb was aimed with precision, a stark reminder of Emily's inferior position. The tutor was daring to speak out of turn, to challenge the authority of a titled lady. The tension between the two women became a silent war fought in the halls of Blackwood. Beatrice would issue contradictory orders regarding Isabella's schedule, seeking to undermine Emily's authority. She would make pointed remarks in the Duke's hearing about the dangers of allowing children to become too familiar with the staff. She saw the way Alistair's eyes would occasionally soften when he looked at Emily, the way he engaged the tutor in conversations that went far beyond the scope of their professional relationship. Beatrice saw a rival, and she was determined to eradicate the threat. Alistair, for his part, found himself increasingly irritated by Beatrice's presence. He had allowed the visit out of a sense of duty to his class, a grudging acknowledgement that he would eventually be expected to remarry. But Beatrice's brittle laughter, her superficial conversation, and her casual cruelty to both his daughter and his staff grated on him. He found himself comparing her to Emily, Beatrice's polished artifice against Emily's quiet authenticity. One afternoon, he found Emily in the garden, helping Isabella press flowers into a large book. The scene was peaceful, a stark contrast to the high-strung drama Beatrice had imported into his home. "She's quite taken with you," he said, nodding towards his daughter, who was completely absorbed in her task. "Isabella is a wonderful girl, Your Grace. She just needs to be seen for who she is," Emily replied, not looking up from her work. "Beatrice believes she needs a firmer hand, a more traditional upbringing." Emily's hands stilled. She finally met his gaze, her own clear and direct. "With respect, Your Grace, Lady Beatrice believes Isabella is a block of marble to be chiseled into a shape that suits society. I believe she is a seed that needs only light and space to grow into the person she is meant to be." Her words hung in the air between them. It was a bold statement, a direct contradiction of the woman everyone assumed would be his wife. It was a challenge. Alistair looked at her, at the smudge of dirt on her cheek and the fierce conviction in her eyes, and he felt something shift within him. He was tired of the marble statues that populated his world. He was beginning to yearn for the wild, untamed beauty of a garden. He realized, with a jolt that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that the search for a new duchess might already be over. The woman he was looking for was not the one in the silk dress demanding tea, but the one with dirt on her hands, patiently tending to his broken child. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that Lady Beatrice sensed it too. The long, oppressive evenings, made longer by Lady Beatrice's glittering presence, often drove Emily to seek refuge in the one place Beatrice never ventured, the vast two-story library. It was Alistair's sanctuary, and increasingly it was becoming hers as well. She went there under the pretense of finding new material for Isabella's lessons, but in truth, she went there to breathe. One evening, while searching for a book of poetry on a high shelf, she dislodged a small, leather-bound portfolio. It fell to the floor with a soft thud, spilling its contents. They were charcoal sketches, exquisitely rendered and full of life. A dog sleeping by a fire, a view of the moors from an upstairs window, a portrait of a young Isabella, no older than 5, laughing with a joy Emily had yet to see in her. But the final sketch made her gasp. It was a portrait of a woman, hauntingly beautiful, with a cruel, dissatisfied curve to her lips. She was draped in jewels, but her eyes were empty. Emily knew instantly it was Lady Charlotte, the first Duchess. She was very beautiful. The Duke's voice came from the shadows by the fireplace, making Emily jump. He stepped into the lamplight, his expression unreadable. My late wife had a talent for capturing the surface of things. Embarrassed, Emily quickly gathered the sketches. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I didn't mean to pry." "It's no matter," he said, waving a dismissive hand. He walked over and picked up the portrait of his wife. We were married for 5 years. I do not believe we had a single conversation that was not about money, status, or her social calendar. She saw Isabella as a rival for attention, and Blackwood Manor as a prison. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet the pain beneath was palpable. She believed love was a currency, and she found herself in a marriage where she could not spend it to her liking. It was a startlingly personal confession, and it recontextualized everything for Emily. His coldness wasn't cruelty. It was a shield. His distance from his daughter wasn't indifference. It was a clumsy, broken man's fear of failing her, as he felt he had failed in his marriage. "I am sorry, Your Grace," Emily said softly. He looked at her then, his blue eyes searching her face. "Why is it, Miss Vance, that you are the only person in this house who does not offer me platitudes? You simply offer honesty." "Perhaps it is because I believe you have had a life filled with enough artifice," she replied, her gaze unwavering. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. The air in the library crackled. It was in these stolen moments, surrounded by the wisdom of ages bound in leather, that their connection truly began to forge. They spoke of everything and nothing, of the Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, of the romantic verses of Lord Byron, of the simple joy of a walk in the rain. He discovered her sharp, analytical mind, and she discovered the passionate, wounded heart he kept hidden beneath his ducal armor. This growing intimacy did not go unnoticed. Lady Beatrice, finding Alistair's attention diverted, began to view Emily with outright hostility. The subtle barbs became more direct, the condescension more pronounced. One afternoon, Beatrice cornered Emily in the hallway. "I see you've been making yourself quite comfortable in the library, Miss Vance," she began, her voice a silken threat. "You should be careful. His Grace has a peculiar fondness for strays. But he is a duke, and he will ultimately do what is expected of him. He will marry a woman of his own class. Do not allow yourself to have notions." "My only notion, my lady, is to do my job to the best of my ability," Emily replied, her chin held high. "And your job," Beatrice hissed, stepping closer, "is to tend to the child, not the father. Remember your place, or I shall be forced to remind you of it." The threat was clear, but instead of intimidating Emily, it solidified her resolve. She was not some foolish girl with delusions of grandeur. The bond she felt with Alistair was not about his title or his wealth. It was a meeting of minds, a recognition of a shared loneliness. But Beatrice's warning echoed a deeper fear. What future could there possibly be between a duke and a tutor? That evening, the tension in the manor reached a fever pitch. A letter arrived for Emily, bearing a seal she recognized with a jolt of pure terror. It was the crest of Baron Montgomery. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax. The message was short and chilling. He had learned of her whereabouts. He was in the nearby village of Oakshott and expected her to honor her family's arrangement. He would be in touch soon. The blood drained from her face. Her past, the one she had run so desperately from, had found her. The fragile world she had built at Blackwood was about to come crashing down. Later, Alistair found her in the garden, standing motionless by the stone wall, the crumpled letter clutched in her hand. The sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows across the lawn. "Emily," he said, using her first name for the first time. It sounded both foreign and perfectly natural on his lips. "What is it? You look as if you've seen a ghost." She couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. How could she explain that she was not just a humble tutor, but the daughter of a bankrupt merchant, promised to a vile man who was now just miles away? The shame was too great. The danger felt too real. "It is nothing, Your Grace," she lied, her voice trembling. "A letter from home, some unsettling news." She turned to leave, but he reached out and gently took her arm, stopping her. His touch sent a shockwave through her. "You are a terrible liar, Emily Vance," he said softly, his eyes filled with a concern that undid her completely. "Whatever it is, you do not have to face it alone." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of fear and frustration, and a desperate, impossible longing. She wanted to tell him everything, but Beatrice's words echoed in her mind. "Remember your place." She pulled her arm away. "You are mistaken, Your Grace. I am quite alone," she whispered, before turning and fleeing back into the cold, stone fortress of the manor, leaving him standing alone in the twilight. He watched her go, a dark premonition settling in his heart. He knew she was hiding something, and he was determined to find out what it was. Not to condemn her, but to protect her. Emily's quiet composure vanished, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. Every knock on the door, every approaching footstep, sent a jolt of panic through her. Baron Montgomery's threat hung over her like a guillotine. She became withdrawn and distracted, her lessons with Isabella losing their spark. The easy rapport she had built with Alistair evaporated, replaced by a formal distance she deliberately created, believing it was the only way to protect him and his household from the scandal she was sure was about to erupt. Alistair was baffled and hurt by her sudden retreat. One moment, they were on the precipice of a profound connection. The next, she was addressing him with the stilted formality of a stranger. He saw the fear in her eyes, but could not understand its source. He tried to question her, to break through the new wall she had erected, but she skillfully deflected his inquiries. "Isabella is my only concern, Your Grace," she would say, her eyes fixed on a point over his shoulder. "Her progress is all that matters." His frustration grew. He felt as though he was losing her before he had ever truly had her. Was it Beatrice's doing? Had the woman's constant condescension finally driven Emily away? Or was it something more? Something from that mysterious letter that had left her so shaken. Meanwhile, Lady Beatrice, ever the opportunist, revelled in the growing chasm between the Duke and the tutor. She saw her chance and seized it. With Emily distracted and Alistair perturbed, Beatrice doubled her efforts to charm him, planning soirees, inviting influential neighbors and positioning herself as the perfect, indispensable mistress of Blackwood Manor. But Beatrice was not merely content to watch Emily self-destruct. She was determined to give her a push. Emily's gentle breeding and educated speech had always struck Beatrice as incongruous for a simple country tutor. She smelled a secret, and a secret, in her world, was a weapon. She dispatched her personal maid, a woman with a talent for gossip and loose lips, to the village of Oakshott with a carefully crafted list of questions. The instructions were simple. Inquire about a new governess at the manor, a Miss Vance. See what anyone knew. It was a fishing expedition, but Beatrice had excellent instincts. The maid returned 2 days later with a piece of information that made Beatrice's eyes gleam with triumph. A new gentleman had taken rooms at the village inn, a Baron Montgomery, a man of considerable wealth, by all accounts, who had been asking questions of his own. Questions about a young woman who had recently fled London. A young woman named Emily. The pieces clicked into place with satisfying precision. The tutor was not who she seemed. She was running from something, or someone, and that someone was a baron. Beatrice's mind, sharp and malicious, spun a dozen different scandalous scenarios. A jilted lover? A clandestine affair? A broken engagement? Whatever the truth, it was perfect. It was the ammunition she needed to destroy her rival once and for all. She decided to set her trap. "Alistair, darling," she cooed one evening over dinner, laying a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "This house is so dreadfully dreary. We simply must have a ball. A grand affair to announce to simply bring some life back to these old walls." Alistair, preoccupied with his thoughts of Emily, was about to refuse. He hated such events, but Beatrice was persuasive. It would be good for Isabella to see the house as it should be, full of light and music. It would show everyone that Blackwood is ready to embrace the future. The argument, manipulative as it was, struck a chord. Perhaps a grand event was what they needed to break the oppressive tension. It would force things into the open. Reluctantly, he agreed. The moment the words left his mouth, Beatrice began her preparations. Invitations were sent, caterers engaged, musicians hired. Blackwood Manor was thrown into a state of chaotic excitement. But Beatrice's most important invitation was not sent by post. She penned a private, discreet note to Baron Montgomery at the Oakshott Arms, inviting him to the Blackwood ball as her personal guest. She hinted that an item he had been searching for would be in attendance, and that she could facilitate its recovery. Unaware of the intricate web being woven around her, Emily watched the preparations for the ball with a sense of dread. For her, it was not a celebration, but a countdown. Montgomery had been silent since his first letter, a silence she found more terrifying than any threat. She knew he was toying with her, waiting for the most opportune moment to strike. A grand ball, with the Duke and all his influential friends in attendance, would be the perfect stage for her humiliation. She considered fleeing again, packing her meager belongings in the dead of night. But the thought of leaving Isabella, of abandoning the first real progress the child had made, was unbearable. And a treacherous voice in her heart whispered, the thought of leaving Alistair was even worse. One evening, as the date of the ball loomed closer, she saw Alistair walking on the terrace, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his duties and his personal turmoil evident in his posture. Her heart ached for him. She wanted to run to him, to confess everything, to throw herself on his mercy. But fear held her paralyzed. The shame of her family's ruin, the terror of what Montgomery would do. It was a cage of her own making. So she remained in the shadows, watching the man she was beginning to love, while her enemies, one cloaked in silk and diamonds, the other in avarice and obsession, prepared to converge and tear her world apart. The trap was set. The bait was her own desperate hope for a life she could never have, and the Blackwood ball would be where it was sprung. The village of Oakshott was a quiet, unassuming place, but for Baron Montgomery it was a hunting ground. He was a patient predator. He had been furious when he discovered Emily had fled London, seeing it not as an act of self-preservation, but as a personal insult. She was his, by an agreement with her fool of a father. The Vance fortune was gone, but possessing the beautiful, refined Emily would be a victory in itself, a lovely ornament to show off, a testament to the fact that he, Baron Montgomery, always got what he wanted. He settled into the village inn, making casual inquiries, his purse readily open to loosen the tongues of stable hands and serving girls. It didn't take long to confirm that a Miss Vance was indeed employed up at the Manor. The timing was perfect. He was content to wait, to let her feel a false sense of security before he pounced. Then, Lady Beatrice's note arrived. It was an unexpected boon, an alliance with a powerful insider. He now had a key to the fortress. His first move was to confront Emily directly, to remind her who was in control. He waited for a day when he knew the Duke was away at a market in a neighbouring town. He found Emily walking with Isabella near the edge of the Blackwood estate, where the formal gardens gave way to a small wood. He stepped out from behind a large oak tree, his portly figure blocking their path. He was dressed in extravagantly coloured silks, a vulgar peacock in the rustic setting. A cruel smirk played on his thick lips. "Emily, my dear," he said, his voice oozing a possessive charm that made her skin crawl. Running off without a word. I was dreadfully worried. Emily froze, instinctively pushing Isabella behind her. "Baron," she managed, her voice a choked whisper. "What are you doing here?" Isabella peered around Emily's skirts, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity at this strange, garishly dressed man. "I came to collect what is mine, of course," Montgomery said, his eyes raking over Emily, making her feel as though she were on an auction block. "Your father, bless his soul, gave me his word. A promise was made." "My father was desperate. That promise died with him," Emily said, finding a sliver of courage. "I am not property. You have no claim on me." The Baron's smirk vanished, replaced by a dark scowl. "Don't be naive, my girl. You have nothing. No name, no money. I am offering you a life of luxury. You should be on your knees with gratitude. Instead, you are here, playing nursemaid in the mud." He took a step closer. "I will not be made a fool of. You will come with me, or I will make it my mission to ruin whatever pathetic little life you've scraped together here. I will tell the Duke exactly who you are, the daughter of a bankrupt cheat, a woman who breaks sacred vows. Do you think His Noble Grace will want you then?" The threat was clear and devastating. He would not just take her, he would destroy her reputation and her sanctuary first. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. "Stay away from me," she whispered, her voice trembling as she held Isabella closer. Montgomery chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "Oh, I will. For now. Lady Beatrice has been most informative. I understand there is to be a ball, a perfect occasion for us to announce our long-awaited union. Be ready." He gave her a final, leering look, then turned and sauntered back into the woods, leaving Emily shaking, her heart pounding against her ribs. She returned to the Manor in a daze, the Baron's threats echoing in her head. Her carefully constructed anonymity was gone. She was trapped. Beatrice and Montgomery were working in concert, a pincer movement designed to crush her. Her distress was not lost on Mrs. Gable. The stern housekeeper had watched Emily with shrewd, observant eyes since her arrival. She had seen the way the tutor had healed the broken child and thawed the frozen duke. She had also seen the malice in Lady Beatrice's gaze. Mrs. Gable was a creature of duty and order, but beneath her rigid exterior was a fierce loyalty to the Beaumont family and the well-being of the manor. She found Emily in the schoolroom that evening, long after Isabella was asleep, staring blankly at a book. "You are in trouble, Miss Vance," Mrs. Gable stated. It wasn't a question. Emily looked up, startled. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the lie wouldn't form. Her composure crumbled, and to her own mortification, tears began to stream down her face. Mrs. Gable's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She pulled up a chair and sat opposite the distraught young woman. "I do not know the details of your life before you came to Blackwood," the housekeeper said, her voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. "But I know what I see. I see a good woman who has brought light back to this house. I see a schemer in silks who wishes to extinguish it, and I see a master who is too blind to know his own heart." She leaned forward. "His Grace is a good man, but a proud one. He is burdened by duty. If you are in danger, you must tell him. Do not let pride or fear be your undoing." Emily, touched by this unexpected kindness, finally confided a part of her story. She didn't name the Baron, but she spoke of a terrible arrangement made by her late father, of a cruel man she could never marry, and of her flight to Blackwood to escape him. Mrs. Gable listened without interruption, her hands folded in her lap. When Emily finished, she nodded slowly. "I see. A wolf has been let in among the sheep." She stood, her spine once again ramrod straight. "The ball is in 2 days. You must be prepared for a confrontation. But know this, Miss Vance," she added, pausing at the door. "You have allies in this house, more than you know." The housekeeper's words were a small comfort, but they could not erase the stark reality of Emily's situation. She was caught between a man who wanted to own her and a woman who wanted to destroy her. Her only defense was the truth, but revealing it would mean exposing her deceptions and risking the very thing she had come to value most, the tentative, fragile trust of Duke Alistair Beaumont. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the grand ballroom would soon become a battlefield. The night of the ball, Blackwood Manor was transformed. Hundreds of candles blazed in chandeliers, casting a warm, golden glow over the gilded cornices and polished marble floors. The sound of a string quartet drifted up the grand staircase, and the air hummed with the chatter and laughter of the county's elite. It was a world of silks, jewels, and whispered secrets, a world Emily had once been on the fringes of and now stood entirely outside. She had pleaded a headache, begging to be excused, but Alistair would not hear of it. He had sent Mrs. Gable to her room with a message that was less a request and more a command. She was to attend. An hour later, a dressmaker's box had arrived. Inside lay a gown of deep midnight blue velvet, simple yet exquisitely cut. It was a colour that complemented her auburn hair and hazel eyes, a dress that spoke of understated elegance, not gaudy display. There was no note, but she knew it was from him. The gesture was both a kindness and a torment, pulling her deeper into a fantasy she knew was about to be shattered. When she descended the staircase, a hush fell over the small cluster of guests in the entrance hall. The simple tutor was gone. In her place was a woman of striking grace and beauty. She saw Alistair standing near the ballroom entrance, and for a moment their eyes met across the crowded room. The look on his face, a mixture of awe, admiration, and something deeper, something fiercely protective, made her heart ache with what might have been. Lady Beatrice, resplendent in a gown of crimson silk and dripping with diamonds, saw the exchange. A venomous fury coiled in her gut. That the Duke would bestow such a favour on a mere servant was the ultimate insult. It cemented her resolve. Tonight, she would not just expose Emily, she would obliterate her. Emily tried to make herself invisible, lingering at the edges of the room. But Alistair sought her out. "You look magnificent, Emily," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "Your grace is too kind," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "This was not necessary." "It was," he insisted, his gaze intense. "I will not have you hiding in the shadows." He offered her his arm. "Walk with me." It was a bold, public gesture, and it sent a fresh wave of whispers through the room. The Duke, parading the governess on his arm. Beatrice watched, her smile tightening into a predatory grimace. Her moment was coming. She waited until the height of the evening, when the champagne had flowed freely and the ballroom was packed. She saw Baron Montgomery, looking smug and impatient, positioned near the French doors. It was time. With a tinkling laugh, Beatrice drew the attention of the group of lords and ladies surrounding the Duke. "Alistair, darling, you have been keeping the most fascinating secret from us all," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. All eyes turned to her. "And what secret is that, Beatrice?" Alistair asked, a note of weariness in his tone. Beatrice's eyes glittered as she turned them on Emily, who stood frozen beside the Duke. "Why, the true identity of your charming little tutor, of course. You see, she is not merely Miss Vance. She is Miss Emily Vance, the only daughter of the late Thomas Vance." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The name was known to many. Thomas Vance, the merchant who had overreached, whose shipping empire had collapsed into scandal and ruin, leaving a wake of debt and disgraced investors. "A bankrupt's daughter," Beatrice continued, savouring each word. "Forced to flee London to work as a common servant. One can hardly blame her for her little deception. But the story, my dears, gets even more interesting." She gestured dramatically towards the French doors. It seems the poor girl was not just fleeing debt. She was fleeing a sacred promise, a marriage contract. On cue, Baron Montgomery stepped forward from the shadows, a triumphant sneer on his face. "Indeed," he boomed, striding into the centre of the room. "Miss Vance is my betrothed, an arrangement sanctioned by her dear, departed father. I have come to take her home." The room erupted in a cacophony of shocked murmurs. It was a scandal of epic proportions. The Duke's governess was a fraud, the daughter of a charlatan, and promised to another man. Emily felt the floor drop away from beneath her. Every eye in the room was on her, 100 points of judgment and scorn. This was it. The humiliation she had feared, played out on the grandest possible stage. Her vision swam, and she swayed on her feet. Beatrice smiled, a slow, cruel smile of absolute victory. She had won. She had exposed the upstart tutor for the nobody she was, and had served her up to this odious baron. The Duke would have no choice but to cast Emily out in disgrace. But Alistair didn't move. He did not recoil from Emily in disgust. Instead, his hand, which had been resting on her arm, moved to cover her hand, his grip firm and steadying. He looked not at the crowd, not at Beatrice, and not at the Baron. He looked only at Emily, his blue eyes clear and calm. Then he turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping over the assembly before settling, like chips of ice, on Lady Beatrice. The room fell silent, waiting for the Duke's explosion of rage. But when he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "You are mistaken, my lady." The Duke's words. "You are mistaken, my lady. sliced through the tense silence of the ballroom. Lady Beatrice's triumphant smile faltered. Alistair took a single, deliberate step forward, shielding Emily from the crowd. He fixed his cold gaze first on Baron Montgomery, then on Beatrice. "You see, when a member of my household is threatened, I make it my business to know why. My solicitor in London is exceptionally thorough. He not only confirmed Miss Vance's identity, a fact I have known for weeks, but he also uncovered a rather nasty pattern of predatory behavior connected to you, Baron. It seems you specialize in ruining men to claim their daughters." The Baron paled, sputtering denials that convinced no one. Alistair paid him no mind, turning his full scorn upon Beatrice. "And you, my lady, to conspire with such a creature, to bring this poison into my home simply to satisfy your own petty cruelty. You have shown your true character tonight. You are not welcome here. Leave." Publicly shamed and dismissed, Beatrice fled the ballroom in ruin. The Baron, seeing his scheme and reputation destroyed, vanished into the crowd and out of the manor doors. With the accusers gone, Alistair turned back to Emily. The anger in his expression melted away, replaced by a profound tenderness that made her heart ache. The entire room seemed to fade until it was only the two of them. He took both of her hands in his. "My first marriage was a duty. It was a cold, empty arrangement," he said, his voice now meant only for her. "I swore I would never again settle for anything less than a true partner. I have been searching not for a duchess, but for a woman of kindness, intelligence, and strength. I was searching for you." To the collective gasp of the entire assembly, the Duke of Blackwood went down on one knee. "Emily Vance," he declared, his voice ringing with sincerity, "you have healed my daughter, and you have healed my heart. You came here as a tutor, but I am asking you to stay as my wife. Will you marry me?" Tears of pure joy streamed down Emily's face. The fear and shame that had held her captive for so long finally washed away. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Alistair. Of course, yes." He rose and kissed her, a promise sealed in defiance of all convention. The stunned silence of the room broke into a wave of heartfelt applause. From the top of the grand staircase, a small girl in a nightgown watched the scene below, a radiant, happy smile lighting up her face. The broken pieces of their family were finally being made whole. And so, the tutor who arrived at Blackwood Manor with nothing but a trunk of worn clothes and a heart full of secrets found her home. Emily and Alistair's story reminds us that true nobility isn't about titles or wealth, but about kindness, intelligence, and the courage to choose love against all odds. They, along with young Isabella, built a new life together, filling the once silent halls of the manor with laughter, learning, and an affection that healed all past wounds. They proved that a true partnership is built on respect and understanding, not status and expectation. What did you think of Emily's journey and the Duke's powerful stand? Did Lady Beatrice and Baron Montgomery get what they deserved? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of love, drama, and triumph, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with a friend who loves a good historical romance, and most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue creating content for you to enjoy. We can't wait to see you in the next video.